Well, let's look at the big picture now. Let's bring in Chip Register. He joins us from New York. And Mr. Register, if we look at the big picture here as far as America's or North America's energy needs is concerned, how important is this pipeline?
Well, it's very important. It's going to be a pipeline bringing almost 1 million barrels of oil a day into the United States. It's heavy crude oil, which is what the southern refiners need in order to produce refined products out of it, and it's going to be an important source going forward of that type of oil. Very contentious, of course, in the methods of producing that oil, but the pipeline itself is going to be an important part of our energy infrastructure, moving heavy oil down south to those refineries.
Right, Jessica, let me bring you back in. If the U.S. president indeed greenlights the Keystone Pipeline project, would it still be tied up in the courts? What does it mean?
It sounds like, from what we understand right now, and of course there'll be some interpretations on this, that even if the president does permit this, that permit would only apply to the U.S.-Canada border. That still leaves the route of Keystone XL through the state of Nebraska in question. And the Public Commission, which is what the judge says should have made this decision, they may need some sort of legislation. This could go on for a long time and really delay the project further.
So legally, what happens next?
The state's representative, the Attorney General, has appealed the case. It'll go to the state Supreme Court. But I did ask the attorney for the plaintiffs, for the landowners today, whether he thinks it could go to the U.S. Supreme Court. He says there's no chance of that in his mind, that there wouldn't be the right legal framework for that.
Okay, let's go back to Chip Register in New York. Mr. Register, all these legal basically challenges that we're hearing to the construction of the pipeline, what does it do in the end?
Well, it probably creates delay. As I said, I think the pipeline is a 2,000-mile piece of a 2.5 million mile U.S. pipeline system. So there's nothing different about this pipeline than any other pipeline. And sometimes they go through public service commissions for comments and negotiations with landowners and whatnot. That's all part and parcel of the normal process. Sometimes they get fast-tracked through various methods. This one clearly is going to go through a more rigorous process than the owners had hoped, the builders had hoped. I think, though, that depending on how the president behaves in the next few weeks or few months, which I think has a lot to do with the November midterm elections ultimately, that's going to determine the pace of ultimate approval of the project.
Right, and despite all that opposition that is coming from landowners in the area where the pipeline is supposed to be running, and of course we have these challenges in court as well, are there any doubts in your mind that this will not happen?
No, I think ultimately the Keystone Pipeline will get built because these challenges that they've had, this is normal to and fro negotiations with landowners. Again, we have a 2.5 million mile pipeline system. It's all been through this process before. I don't see any reason that Keystone would be different than any other pipeline. What makes it different ultimately is two things. One is that sitting at the top of the pipeline is the Canadian tar sands. Jessica's done some reporting on those projects in Alberta. It's a very environmentally controversial way to produce oil. And of course, Keystone has gotten caught up in tar sands politics as opposed to pipeline politics ultimately. On the other hand, you have the president facing midterm elections. There are 12 hotly contested Senate seats right now. The Republicans need to pick up about 6 to win control of the Congress, and of course he's going to pull all stops out to make sure that doesn't happen. That may include giving up Keystone Pipeline as a talking point to a lot of the red state embattled Democratic incumbents that are going to need that ammunition going forward into these election contests.
Right, Jessica, oil is currently being produced not just through the tar sands, but in North America, in the United States as well. Right. How does that oil get to the refineries?
Well, if it can't get by this pipeline, it's already going by train in many cases. And what we've seen is that there's been so much oil production and a mismatch with the existing infrastructure in both Canada and the United States. There isn't enough pipeline capacity for the oil to continue to come. As a result, it's going to rail. And as a further result of that, we've seen some very prominent fires and deaths where crude oil has been carried. There's been accidents in Lac-Mégantic last year, Quebec. There were 47 people that died in that. There was another collision in North Dakota recently, just just in the last few months, and we've seen the U.S. and Canadian government react to that, impose stricter rules. For example, now they're trying to reroute those trains around major urban populations so that if anything does happen, it doesn't affect any people. We don't have any more loss of life. But you're really seeing the sort of second and third waves of impact now in North America of this amazing exploration and finding of domestic energy, of new resources for the United States and for Canada.
Right, Chip, and we look at the destination of this oil. I mean, it's transported by pipeline, and it will probably be all through pipelines at some stage. It gets to the Gulf of Mexico, where there are refineries. What happens then? Is this for export, or is this for domestic consumption?
Well, it could be for both because, as you know, we have restrictions on exporting crude oil, but refined products, of course, we're free to export. The U.S. is free to export as it likes. So the oil itself is not likely bound for export, but the refined products could be. Just to build on one point that Jessica was making, it's really important to understand in these transportation alternatives that if the pipeline wasn't built, you could conceivably move the oil by truck or by rail, which is what's going on now. That's also controversial and fraught with risks. But the Canadian alternative to the Keystone pipeline is shipping the oil on the ocean to Asia, where it will be refined there. So a lot of the argument about Keystone itself and whether or not it adds to sort of the carbonization of the planet, they're really talking about tar sands. And what the State Department found in their finding last month was that building the Keystone pipeline, in fact, doesn't add to the carbonization because the oil has an alternate destination and an alternate way of getting there. So it's very important to keep that in mind, that there is that access route to Asia, and that would be the alternative to building the Keystone pipeline. They would just ship it there and refine it there.
Chip Register, thanks for your insights, sir. Chip was talking to us from New York. Jessica Stone with me here in the studio. Thanks, Jessica.